Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the Wales Biodiversity Partnership Conference. My name's Di Harris. I'll be facilitating this morning's 3 sessions. So really looking forward to good morning's discussion and presentations. Day 2's theme is sort of looking at, reducing threats to biodiversity and sort of focusing on, ecosystems, species and genetic diversity. The first session now will be focusing on the National Nature Service for Wales. We've got 3 speakers this morning, followed by a Q&A session. So please put any questions, comments in the chat, and we'll pick those up at the end of the session. As I say, we'll go through the three presentations, and as I say, if you could save the questions till the end, we'll pick those up at the Q&A session. So also, please be aware of the Wover platform. All the biographies and all the information is on there as well. So I won't be doing much by way of introductions or background, but as I hand over to each presenter, they'll be introducing themselves as well. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Peter Davis, who's going to kick us off in terms of introducing the National Nature Service for Wales. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Di. Good morning, everybody. Peter Davis. I chair the Wales Council for Voluntary Action and presenting in that capacity today. Joined by our colleagues who are going to be presenting later, Tavia and Dan, who will take us through some of the detail. And my job is to introduce the topic, and just to do that, I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully I'll be able to do that so that you can see the slides. All right, let me go back to the start. Okay, let's see if we can start properly this time. An introduction to the National Nature Service. I think the first thing I want to say is obviously this is set in the context of the conference and the biodiversity deep dive report announced yesterday. And I think what we're talking about in terms of the National Nature Service this morning is something that is going to be transformative. It isn't about something that's doing something that we've always done, but doing it a little bit better and basically getting the same as we've always done. It is about making a statement. It is about making a national statement. It is about something that is going to be transformative for Wales. It's something that is going to be a national response, a national statement about response to the crisis that we have in terms of nature and climate. So that's very much the context in which I want to set this session as being. It's a concept which is about mobilizing a nation. It's about direct action. It's about a whole workforce, whatever the role. It is about pathway to jobs and a pathway to nature-based green jobs, but it's an underpinning experience for all, an opportunity for all, a capacity to engage the whole nation, and particularly to focus in on 16 to 25-year-olds. We haven't said that's the sort of target market, but we're obviously talking about young people coming into the workforce and the potential for engaging them, whatever their future roles may be, in terms of a practical experience that will benefit nature, that will respond to the nature crisis, and will give them skills and experience for jobs in nature, but also jobs in the wider workforce. So it's an underpinning for a future workforce in terms of its eco-literacy and for the future that we need. So very much in the context of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act as a practical intervention that is a national statement and a national response. It has a history in terms of the last couple of years. So it's taken a little bit of time to get to this point. It was a recommendation from the Green Recovery Task and Finish group. It was a proposal into that group that was made by WCVA and the Food and Farming and Countryside Commission. It originates in terms of the Food and Farming Commission in Food and Farming and Countryside Commission in their first report as a key recommendation. It was then taken forward through the process of the Green Recovery Task and Finish group obviously has a genesis which is wide in that sense. It's simply a concept that has a history in terms of ideas such as the conservation core. Indeed, as we were developing this proposal into the Green Recovery Task and Finish group, it was something that we were able to draw on a wide base of experience, not just in Wales, but also internationally in terms of thinking about what we were trying to do. A process of co-design engagement followed that initial submission, and we had a really amazing response in terms of communities and organisations who engaged on the concept in terms of developing the concept of what a National Nature Service should be for Wales. You're going to hear from RSPB, who played a key role in that. You're going to hear from the Valleys Regional Park, who have played a key role, but many other organisations, National Trust, and particular shout out to the Future Generations Commission and the office there, in particular Christian, who led a lot of the process in producing the proposal document that was based around that co-design and engagement work. That co-design and engagement work led to a proposal that was submitted into Welsh Government. This process has taken quite a long time, and I think what's important to recognise is that it's a process that's needed to have that time to engage not just a wide stakeholder group, but also a wide internal network within Welsh Government. This is cross sectors, it's cross departments in terms of Welsh Government. So that has been an important part of the process, has been about getting a wider commitment from across internal departments in Welsh Government to the concept of a National Nature Service. Delighted that ended with an initial support grant that was made available through WCVA. And as I said at the beginning, I chair WCVA, and we're acting as a facilitator in this process to get the concept of the service established. Jennifer, who I hope is on the line, Jennifer Preston, has been appointed to coordinate that working through WCVA, but working extensively with the stakeholder network under the terms of this grant from Welsh Government to support the development of this next stage of the service. And Tabia and Dan will talk a little bit more about that as well. We're putting in place governance arrangements in this initial phase. And recognising that this is an initial phase, an initial development phase. The grant which have been allocated is a grant that will take us through till March. So it's really important that we keep the momentum going rather than have a point at March where we come to an end and we have another gap while we develop the thinking further forward. So it's important that we have a longer term plan. This initial phase takes us through to March. So in terms of what this initial phase looks like, and I'll just walk through this quite slowly in terms of these points. The first point is the development of a business plan with Valleys Regional Park as an early adopter. Through that initial engagement stage, it was clear that Valleys Regional Park were obviously keen to take forward as an early adopter the National Nature Service. It was also very clear that that was a great base in order to have a real test of how the concept could work in an area of significant scale, also of significant need, both socially, economically and environmentally, and to use as a demonstrator for the rollout of a National Nature Service on a wider basis. So although the starting point for this will be the Valleys Regional Park, we're very clear that the concept is as a National Nature Service, and the Valleys Regional Park will act as an early adopter and demonstrator, and Dan will take you through that in much more detail. Being clear about this being a national scheme means that we're creating an engagement plan with the Food, Farming, Countryside Commission to build a recognisable brand for the National Nature Service and a story that communities can get behind, building it very much from the bottom up in terms of that strong stakeholder network that we've established, but creating a national concept for what we're trying to what we're trying to achieve. And I'll put in the chat later the link to the website. And one important action for you, if you haven't done already, is to register on that website, because that will give you that will make sure you're connected into the newsletters and updates that will come through from the development of the service. So I'll put it in the chat and make sure you then register. I think what's important to say as well is that we are building on examples of practice. You know, none of this is new. There's plenty of examples of good practice that has been generated through things like WCVA's Social Inclusion Fund, the Kickstart program, places like organisations like Cynhadledd Valley Organics, who've taken this sort of concept and worked with young people to build skills, capacity, experience, confidence to get people into the workforce. Great examples there. NRW, who are taking on Kickstart placements and have apprenticeship programs. So we've got individual examples that we can build on and have that creates the stories, if you like. But what we haven't got is something that takes this to national scale, and that's what we're trying to do through the concept of the service. I should also mention that people like Groundwork, I'll put this in the chat as well, are working on an England and Wales basis on a scheme called New to Nature, which is another example of a similar concept that we want to sort of engage with and build into the system in terms of what we're trying to do in Wales. And also looking internationally, and I'll put this in the chat as well, where we've got good links through the Future Generations Commissioner's Office to New Zealand, where they have a really interesting jobs for nature programme that the government in New Zealand has been running and supporting, which I think gives us a model and some learning and lessons that we can apply in the thinking as we develop that in Wales. As I say, I'll put some of those links into the chat as we go forward. Important that we right from the outset build in an evaluation framework and work with an external independent evaluator to understand the journey right from this outset as we build forward. So that's going to be one of the things we're going to put in place as an early stage under the grant that we have from Welsh Government. A key point in terms of many of you on the conference will be this point about the fact that we are also through the grant programme making available £5,000 per organisation up to 10 lots of £5,000 to deliver scoping exercises which will contribute towards the wider business plan. Now, Dan is going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like in his presentation, but it's basically trying to give some resource to organisations who might want to combine with others to look at particular themes that will build into the business plan going forward. So building some capacity into that stakeholder network who've given time and resource freely up to this point in terms of building the network, giving a bit more resource to organisations who have got a key role to play in terms of designing the initial stages of the business plan going forward. As I say, Dan will cover that in a bit more detail, and I'm sure we'll be able to answer some questions about that later. Yeah, and finally, that point is the one I've been mentioning, I guess, which is the point about exploring opportunities for shared learning and for future collaboration and potential investment opportunities. We're clear that although Welsh Government are going to be key to the success of the scheme, and Welsh Government support both in principle and in terms of building it into their forward programme will be important, we also want to make sure we're drawing in investment from outside of Welsh Government. And so we're going to be looking at how we build in sustainable investment strands. I think it's also important to recognise that there will be ways in which we can incorporate this concept into existing programmes. I've already mentioned things like Kickstart. There are many schemes, obviously, that we've had recent announcements yesterday of funding schemes. What we need to do is to make sure that we build in to existing funding streams the importance of building skills and opportunities for placements, apprenticeships and ongoing skill development, which are accredited and recognised into funding streams that that exist, but we also want to open up those new funding streams, both from within government and from external. I made the point at the beginning that this is a cross-departmental issue as far as government is concerned. The grant that we've had comes from two different parts of government departments, which is an encouraging start in terms of cross-departmental learning. We've had great engagement from the skills area of Welsh Government. We've had strong engagement from the Economy Minister as well. So I think we're in a good position in terms of cross-governmental commitment and interest in the potential of a National Nature Service. What we now have to do is to demonstrate practically how it can work, how it can deliver value, how it can become that national statement and become that transformative that transformative model that will mobilize people to scale to deliver against the nature and climate crisis. I think it's important that it delivers against both nature and climate crisis. That's obviously a key point that we all want to emphasize, the combination of those factors. So building into the net skills plan of government will be an important part of looking at how the scheme develops overall. So that gives you a sort of an opening sort of an opening in terms of where we've come from. It's been a long process, I think made longer probably by the implications of COVID, etc. Although what that has meant is that we've had very strong engagement through online involvement across Wales. So now we've got some practical capacity to build this forward. We're now very focused on taking this to the next stage, and hopefully this conference will be an important part of doing that. So let's see if I can be a bit more successful in unsharing my screen, and then we can move back to Dai and then on to Tabea, who's going to share the RSPB research and learning that underpins a lot of the thinking behind the National Nature Service. So let me pass back to Dan and then on to Tabea, to Dai rather, and then on to Tabea.
Thanks very much, Peter, for setting the scene there. And just a reminder for everybody as well, please any questions you have, please put them in the chat as well, and we can pick those up at the end. So Dan, over to you for the next element to the National Nature Service.
Tabea, I think.
Is it Tabea next? Sorry,
yeah.
Tabea.
No, it's me
no,
next.
Oh, it's you, Dan. Oh, sorry. That's me.
I thought there was a change in the running order there.
Oh, sorry, there we are.
Can everyone see that?
Yeah, we can see that, Dan. Just can't see you at the moment.
Oh. I'll just share my screen, but share my video. But if my connection starts cutting out, I'll turn it off. Okay. Morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Locke, and I'm the Landscape, Culture and Identity Convener with the Valleys Regional Park. As Peter said, the Valleys Regional Park has been a key partner in helping to develop the proposals for a National Nature Service. I've been involved in the co-design process, at least from the start. And the reason that Valleys Regional Park wanted to be involved is firstly because we fully support the idea of a National Nature Service for Wales. We think it's a great concept and it has huge potential, so it's worthy of supporting anyway. But also we recognised early on that the aims and ambitions of a National Nature Service for Wales very much align with the aims and ambitions of the Valleys Regional Park. Obviously, the Valleys Regional Park is operating on a regional footprint, and the National Nature Service aims to be Wales-wide. But some of the core ambitions of VRP really closely align with what the National Nature Service was focused on. So we felt that the work that we were doing as part of the Valleys Regional Park programme could really inform the National Nature Service proposals, and conversely, the National Nature Service could become a real vehicle for helping VRP to deliver some of its core aims and ambitions. So what I'll do with my little section of the presentation this morning is talk a bit about the Valleys Regional Park first, and give you a bit of an insight into that. I'm sure many people in the conference and on the call would have had an involvement with Valleys Regional Park over the years. It's been around for over 20 years in one form or another. And this current iteration is just the latest phase in it, if you like. It's when myself and my colleagues came on board. But I'll give you a bit of a background into Valleys Regional Park, talk about the Valleys Regional Park vision and what some of those core ambitions are, and the work that we've been doing in this phase with the Discovery Gateway sites. And hopefully that will go some way then to demonstrating where we think the Valleys Regional Park work can inform the National Nature Service, and what our proposals and what the Valleys Regional Park contribution to the proposals were. And then I'll finish off just by talking a bit about where the National Nature Service proposals are at the moment, as Peter mentioned, with the development of this business plan, and what the next steps are and how everybody can get involved if they so wish. Okay, the Valleys Regional Park sometimes causes confusion in terms of what it is. So it is a geographical area. It extends from Pontypool in the east to Carmarthenshire in the west, and up as far as the Brecon Beacons National Park in the north. So it's quite a wide footprint. But in terms of what Valleys Regional Park is, in essence, it's an environmental vision for the valleys, developed and delivered through this growing partnership of local authorities, government agencies, charities, trusts, voluntary organisations and private enterprise. And all of these groups and organisations are working with the local communities around them in their own ways. So it's an informed partnership, it's a broad partnership, and it's important to get across that Valleys Regional Park is a partnership. It's not an organisation, if you like, in and of itself. And it's certainly not myself and my colleagues in the core development team. It is this broader partnership. And it's been around for a long, long time. And that partnership, as I say, is dedicated to developing and delivering this vision. So the Valleys Regional Park vision, it's not particularly sexy or snappy, but it sort of does the job of conveying it. It's of a high quality, sustainable network of green space, which offers outstanding skills and learning opportunities and recreational opportunities, which we hope will change the image and perception of the valleys forever, including improving the quality of life, health and well-being for local people, generating pride in the area, whilst creating an environment that stimulates inward investment and becomes an attractive destination for visitors. So in the context of the National Nature Service, and in the context of today's presentation, I just want to focus on what is one of the central planks, if you like, which is this idea of a high quality, sustainable network of green space, which offers outstanding skills and learning opportunities. And just to emphasise that this has been a sort of a central ambition of VRP throughout the various phases of its development. And the reason for that is, firstly, it's really good to bring people closer to their landscapes and give people opportunities to engage more meaningfully with those landscapes. It's good for people's health and well-being. It's good for people's sense of belonging and sense of place, and all those other things. But also, it obviously creates the potential for a bit of a foundation and pathways into employment. If you're sort of conveying green skills and learning, then that directly feeds into employment opportunities and overall as part of a more landscape-focused, nature-positive economy, as we call it in the valleys. So the Discovery Gateways, as I mentioned at the start, has been a sort of a key focus of this particular iteration of VRP. The Discovery Gateways are largely country parks and nature reserves and those sorts of sites scattered across the valleys. There are 12 Discovery Gateway sites, and we think collectively they draw in around 2 million visits annually. So these are high profile, highly visible, highly accessible sites which have huge reach and attract a wide range of audiences from all ages and all backgrounds. So this phase of VRP came with a big chunk of investment, £7 million of capital investment, which was shared out across the network of 12 Discovery Gateway sites. That investment was targeted at improving the visitor experience to increase the tourism potential, because that is part of the Valleys Regional Park remit. But more strategically, I guess, and in the context of today's presentation, that investment was also targeted at improving the infrastructure and the facilities of those sites so they are better able to engage with visitors and offer a range of opportunities. So there were access improvements, there was new interpretation, there were new education and volunteer facilities. The idea being then that you create this network of hubs in the landscape which people can access to discover more about the local natural and cultural heritage, and they then function as stepping stones into the wider landscape of the valley. So on a visit to Bringaru or Dare Valley or one of the other country parks, you can be exposed to the on-site interpretation or the other events and programs that they run, and this will give you a far more meaningful understanding of the wider landscape, and you're more informed and more inspired and engaged when you go out into that wider landscape. This is our lovely map of the Valleys Regional Park area, and it shows the 12 Discovery Gateway sites. Important to say that we are focusing on these 12 Discovery Gateway sites at the moment because they are high profile and highly visible, and they attract a wide range of audiences. But the Valleys Regional Park itself is obviously more than these 12 sites, and there are numerous sites like these doing all sorts of amazing things across the footprint. and our door certainly isn't closed to working with any of those. The Valleys Regional Park, as I say, is a partnership, and everyone who's doing anything to do with this sort of work in the valleys is essentially part of that partnership and part of delivering that vision. So we will work with a range of different sites, and there are all sorts of other networks out there, the Cwm Taf Nature Network and the Living Landscapes Network of sites from RCT. But we focused on the 12 Discovery Gateways in terms of the investment and in terms of working up their potential. So with the investment in the sites made and the sites sort of raised to a certain level, we were then in a position to use the Valleys Regional Park Guardians programme to really start helping these sites to realise their potential in terms of engaging with the local communities and conveying all sorts of benefits. So the Guardians programme is very much the delivery arm of the Valleys Regional Park. It's delivered by Groundwork Wales, and the Guardians are, Groundwork Wales, as we know, are very, very good at this sort of community engagement type work, particularly the nature-based community engagement sort of work. And the Guardians have been working out of the Discovery Gateways to engage local communities and explore a range of different landscape-based skills, learning and engagement opportunities. And so they've set up new volunteer programs, they've tested social prescribing, green social prescribing programs, education programs, they've worked with schools. The Guardians aren't there in a long-term sustainable way. They're only funded currently up until early next year. So they're not there to deliver these programs in a long-term way, but what they have been really successful in doing is demonstrating that there is a real clear demand and appetite amongst local people and local communities for more of these sorts of opportunities, more opportunities to gain green skills and learning and understanding on the doorsteps of their local communities. So these country parks, these Discovery Gateways are very much on the doorsteps of local communities, and having these sorts of opportunities on offer there for local people to tap into, we know is a really sort of sought after thing, and we know that there's a huge demand for it. So that's the sort of work we've been focused on as part of this phase of Valleys Regional Park. And that's sort of, we've done a lot more than that, but that's for the purposes of this presentation, that's one of the key things we've been focusing on. And the understanding that we've gained from that, the potential of having a network of sites which are highly popular, really well sort of loved and well subscribed to, but then having these programs for engaging people and driving up skills and learning and understanding. Something like that we thought could really play a role in the National Nature Service. So we know, I don't want to preempt anything that Tabea is going to talk about, but we know that if we're serious about addressing the nature emergency, and if we're serious about investing in nature, that could potentially create thousands and thousands of new jobs because somebody's got to do that work. But we also know that there's a skills gap, essentially. So organisations like the New Economics Foundation have said that there is a clear skills gap for doing these jobs of the future and doing the work that nature needs. The Future Gen commissioners sort of had this ambition for Wales being the most eco-literate country in the world. And the question is, how do you do that? So again, a network of sites on the doorsteps of local communities offering these sorts of opportunities in a systemised and consistent way across the footprint would be a really strong step forward in delivering that. So it's not just about green jobs. You know, in the context of the nature emergency, we need everybody's eco-literacy to be raised, and arguably a root cause of the nature crisis is that we collectively have fairly low levels of eco-literacy. There isn't that pool of people who are informed and know enough and are skilled enough to just step into these jobs. So we need a skills pipeline as well as a pipeline directly into the jobs. And we think sort of reimagining our country parks, if you like, and our Discovery Gateways so they become skills hubs could be a good way of achieving that. I use Bringaru Country Park as a case study. It's one of the Discovery Gateway sites. It's also the park that I seconded over from, so I'm most familiar with it. I'm also biased. And I think it's fair to say that it's probably furthest down the line in terms of a park offering these sorts of consistent opportunities around volunteering and skills development and environmental education. So I'm going to use Bringaru as a case study just to demonstrate the potential, if you like. So like all country parks, or like many of our country parks at least, Bringaru isn't just one type of habitat. It's got a mosaic of different natural habitats. It's a microcosm of the wider landscape. So it's got wildflower grassland, it's got broadleaf woodland, it's got the river corridor, it's got ponds and lakes and wetlands and wet woodlands, and all of the sort of habitats you might find out, or many of the habitats you'd find out in the wider landscape. So through a year's worth of volunteering, if you take part in the annual volunteer program at Bringaru, for example, you will experience a range of different habitat types. You'll gain skills in restoring and managing and maintaining those different habitat types. and all of the learning and the understanding and the eco-literacy that goes along with those different habitats and being involved and immersed in those different habitats. Our Cultural Trust is the managing organisation for that manages Bryngarw Country Park, and they have had the sort of the vision to retain and invest in a qualified and experienced ranger team. And because they have that experienced and qualified staff resource, they're able to deliver and develop these really successful programs. So Bryngarw has a really successful annual volunteer program, and in fact it's too successful, it's oversubscribed to, and there are more people wanting to take part in that program than the rangers there can handle, which again goes to show that there is a huge demand for this sort of thing. And if there were other sites nearby which were adequately resourced and were able to offer these sorts of programs and opportunities, they would be successful, I dare say, too. Bryngarw also deliver a really successful environmental education program for local schools, with over 30 local schools visiting annually. The vast majority of those schools are primary school age, but again, that's really important because I don't want to preempt anything which Tabea may talk about in her presentation, but we know that young people generally aren't aware of these sorts of opportunities. They aren't aware of the green jobs that may be on offer. They aren't aware of any pathways into those green jobs, and perhaps more worryingly, their wider support networks aren't aware of these sorts of opportunities. So engaging children at a really young age by coming to places like our country parks and having a really meaningful experience of the natural environment can be enough to spark the inspiration. And they're the ecologists and everything else of the future. And so getting to children while they're young like that is obviously a key thing. And many of those children who come to visit parks like Bryngarw as part of those study trips go on to volunteer in those parks and go on to gain a career in the nature sector off the back of that. So again, just to say on the schools as well, I know that just under 50% of the schools that visit Bryngarw come from outside of Bridgend County Borough, where Bryngarw is based. So again, we know that if there were similar opportunities near to home, nearer their doorsteps, I'm sure they would take advantage of those. But the fact that they're coming all the way to Bryngarw does do a fantastic job of what it does. So partly it's because they're really good at what they do, but also I think it's because there is a lack of opportunity more broadly for these schools to consistently tap into, to have the children having this really positive, meaningful experience of the natural environment and all of the learning and the inspiration that goes with that. And just to finish by saying that many participants in the Bryngarw volunteer programme have used that learning and understanding and the skills that they've gained as a platform to go on to gain really good careers in the nature sector. And even better, many of those people who've gone on to gain really good careers have come back and have reinvested in that volunteer programme by delivering their own sessions on species identification or surveying techniques or all sorts of things. So if you create these hubs and invest in these hubs with the bare minimum of staff resources to run these programs, you quickly end up developing something which is greater than the sum of its parts and which becomes a sort of a human ecosystem of opportunity in its own right, if you like, and it sort of it becomes self-perpetuating. So yeah, so that was the sort of crux, if you like, of the Valleys Regional Park's contribution to the NNS proposals. Not to say that that's what a National Nature Service would look like, but it's certainly something that can contribute to that. And this idea of having these opportunities on the doorsteps of local people, particularly in the valleys, in an area where jobs and nature restoration is needed the most, and where these opportunities are really valued, we think that could be a really good sort of addition or inclusion to the broader National Nature Service proposals. But as I said, the National Nature Service is broader than that. And as Peter mentioned, we're now in a position where we've had this grant from Welsh Government to work up this business case for the Valleys Regional Park as a demonstrator. And the idea being that the Valleys Regional Park offers an opportunity to demonstrate the ambitions of a National Nature Service in an area where both jobs, as I said, and nature restoration needed the most. And we hope that this initiative can add value and depth to existing services. So there's all sorts of amazing things already going on, but if they're joined up and scaled up and brought together, they again become greater than the sum of their parts. So we want to set out a scalable approach that can support this wider vision of a National Nature Service for Wales. So with the business case, we're now in a position where we're sending out a request for proposals. We're finalising the forms and everything that will do that, but we're pretty much there. So as I said, the National Nature Service will be wide-ranging to reflect the full challenge and urgency of the nature crisis, and it will need to incorporate a whole range of different aspects and themes. And the lead partners involved in that development are now inviting proposals from wider stakeholders for these scoping exercises that Peter mentioned earlier that will contribute to the business plan. And as Peter said, the scoping exercises can be funded up to the value of £5,000, and they should contribute to developing one or more of the different aspects that we think will feed into a National Nature Service. So what we're looking for is proposals based on one or more of these themes. I won't read all of the themes out, but you sort of get the idea that it's going to be broad. That there are various aspects. The nature crisis itself is complicated and multifaceted. So we want all of these aspects and more. This isn't an exhaustive or comprehensive list. There's all sorts of other things I'm sure that could feed in. But if you or your organisations have any thoughts on what can contribute to along these sorts of themes to the National Nature Service, and if you want up to £5,000 worth of funding to work up your proposals into a solid scoping exercise, then this is the stage where we're at, where we're looking for these contributions, we're looking for these proposals to feed into the business plan. The idea being that this business plan will then be submitted to Welsh Government in February, I think, next year, late February, fully informed, fully costed, and hopefully that will be what takes us then to the next stage of delivery. As Peter mentioned earlier, and as I'm sure Tabea will mention in her presentation, if you want to get involved, and I really hope you do, if you go onto the National Nature Service for Wales website, or if you just Google National Nature Service for Wales and then click the Get Involved tab, it will take you to a section where you can register your details, and then you'll be kept informed of all the updates, and you'll be able to get involved in this this request for proposals process that we're now going to go through. That's enough from me, I think. Any questions, obviously put them in the chat bar and we'll answer them at the end. But I'll wrap it up for now and hand over to Tabea. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. No, it's really good presentation, and there's a lot going on in Valleys Regional Park already, and lots of opportunities for others to get involved and help develop the proposals moving forward. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to hand over now to Tabea Wilkes from RSPB, who will be sort of looking at this, I think, from opportunities, helping to tackle nature crisis and emergency, and creating green jobs, etc. So over to you, Tabea.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dan. Hold on. Let me move this screen. You see that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant. Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to see there's still loads of people listening to this. I'm going to take you through some of the wider vision that's kind of been kind of evidence-based to guide some of the work over the last 2 years, but also will hopefully start to or continue to inform this work as it goes forward, and we develop it from a proposal to a pilot to a more national vision for a National Nature Service. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things, and both Peter and Dan have already touched on these. One of them is kind of where we want to go and where we've kind of come from, conceiving this in the middle of lockdown and the pandemic, to a wider vision for transformative change as we kind of move forward. Key element of this is kind of the skilling and reskilling element. I've just seen in the chat, there's already been some questions around who this kind of affects, whether it's young people or across the range. So we're going to have a look at that. And then we're going to have a look at some of the figures that Dan's just mentioned around the job creation potential that some of these schemes, if implemented, could actually achieve for Wales and contribute as part of a kind of transformative shift towards a green workforce, and the jobs that it can create, and at the same time, the skills gap that we're facing in order to actually achieve this potential. So Peter's already kind of hinted at this. The major movement and engagement with stakeholders that we had with the National Nature Service came almost in the midst of the second lockdown. And I think a lot of the kind of vision for this has almost been informed by it. Young people, or evidence at the time showed that young people would have been the hardest hit by the pandemic, because they would be in jobs that would have been either at risk of not being rehired, they were on fixed term contracts, they were in industries that weren't able to operate during COVID. So in a way, there has been a bit of an awareness that a National Nature Service could particularly benefit young people, and we've been looking at working with young people between the ages of 16 and 25. So that kind of range where they will be looking to move from education into work opportunities. There's obviously a second element to this where there's a huge amount of impact seen across not just young people, but anybody who has a lower level of education. So a huge ambition for a National Nature Service is to be accessible to everyone, not just to people who have an undergrad degree or even a finished school. And we kind of conceive this as an idea that you need a vehicle to bring all of these people on board from a very, very difficult situation and bring it forward as part of what we were then calling a green recovery that's in line with nature. So our economic recovery from COVID would also tackle a nature and climate crisis with jobs at the very, very heart of that. There's also a second element to that when we're looking at the general nature and climate crisis, that we kind of want to achieve a just transition over the next decade. We know from a lot of scientific reports that the bulk of the work to achieve us in tackling the nature and climate crisis will need to happen in the next 10 years, which means that if we want to create jobs, it needs to kind of happen now, and it also needs to take people on board who are working in industries that are no longer sustainable and that might be subject to a just transition. People who might be very, very highly skilled, people who might not want to relocate or we would want them to relocate, and that there's a maybe reskilling element to bring others along on that journey to move them to nature jobs, to tackle a nature and climate crisis as part of a just transition over the next 10 years. We did have a very specific focus on young people for a while because of the reasons mentioned, and as RSPB Cymru, we commissioned a report which produced an interview with a couple of young people, and I'm just going to share it because it's quite an important insight, I think, into some of the barriers of access to the nature sector at the moment. Because ideally a kind of national vision for a nature service will kind of incorporate this and understand what current barriers are and start to address them. And I think we've already talked about some of them around education and accessibility. So there's a few things that kind of stood out that matters to young people, and there are a lot of things that you would kind of expect. They want to be recognized for the work that they contribute. They want to be valued, they want to have a healthy, safe work environment, and they also had some very, very clear barriers of access to the sector, and all of us probably work in the sector or adjacent to it. We might be very aware of these already, but one of them is a general awareness. As Dan mentioned, it's concerning that young people don't really know what the sector is and that you can work in nature, and kind of green jobs in general. But it's also more concerning that their support networks don't know that this is even a career path. So they wouldn't even know who to ask. And if they did ask, they probably wouldn't find anyone who would tell them. I think there's a general understanding that it's quite a technical field, and quite difficult to understand how to navigate it. Let's share one quote, which was my absolute favorite, which was from, I think, a 17-year-old that was interviewed, who said, "You wouldn't know the range of opportunities, you just hear birds and not know there's quite a lot of range there," which I think just about says it all. So I think across the kind of range of work that's happened with young people, we know that there's a massive barrier. And I think part of the opportunity with the National Nature Service is to understand how to bring people into meaningful jobs that contribute to skills development, pick people up at any stage, and introduce them to work in nature. And if they decide that they want a career in it, that's great. And if they want to take those skills somewhere else, that's also okay. But just to open those doors that just don't seem to be open at the moment. Which brings me to the next point, which is kind of understanding what kind of green jobs we're talking about here as part of a just transition, generally to tackle the nature and climate crisis. We've kind of been talking about this on a kind of dark to light green scale, and this was a massive conversation as part of a green recovery, where on the dark green scale, you have the nature-based jobs and skills. So these are kind of very much involved with restoration and creation of habitats and green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, environmental land management, especially in Wales around agriculture, that kind of stuff. Then you have this, I call them decarbonisation jobs, which are green jobs that will contribute to decarbonisation, but not necessarily nature's recovery. So that's all of your kind of clean energy, housing, transport, communications, new technologies. And then a wider vision is to understand kind of in 10 years' time, if we've tackled nature and climate crisis to the way that we really should be aspiring to, that all jobs need to have some element of a green expertise. All engineers need to understand the impact of their work. All teachers need to understand a sort of what they're teaching in terms of natural sciences in that kind of context. And I think all of these are part of a transformative shift. The National Nature Service focuses on the first of these because very specifically in Wales, it hasn't received that much attention. The job creation potential very specifically for jobs in nature to tackle the nature crisis. So it's very much seen alongside a wider ambition for decarbonisation jobs that we were talking about massively across the range of like green recovery ambitions. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of figures, and I'm going to keep it very, very high level and then share the reports after because everyone's been here for an hour and I don't think we all need to go into the details of the figures. But there's some really, really interesting stuff in here because I think it will surprise most people by the absolute potential that Wales has to create these jobs. So there was a couple figures that came out. One was produced by Transition Economics for the Wales TUC. And they kind of looked at the whole range of kind of nature, decarbonisation, kind of that whole range of green jobs, but very specifically for the jobs under the land sector. So reforestation, environmental restoration, including flood defences, which is something we were talking about massively back in 2020 on the back of the flooding that we had in 2019, and support farmers to switch to organic agriculture, which is very, very specific in this report, but obviously with the new sustainable farming scheme coming in last month, that will be core to kind of a transformative shift in Wales as well. So the link needs to be made there, even if it's a little bit broader than very specifically organic agriculture. And across those kind of sectors, Transition Economics estimated over 4,000 jobs that could be created in Wales. So that's across direct jobs, so the actual jobs that would happen, that would be created, and indirect jobs, which are the jobs that would be created by the supply chains that arise naturally, which in itself is enormous if you think about the fact that if an industry closes down anywhere in Wales, that's over 700-800 people. That is national news and an economic catastrophe for the area. 4,000 jobs is a lot in Wales. So this was estimated over a kind of 2-year timeline, very, very much in the COVID recovery context. And on the back of this, RSPB Cymru commissioned Matt Raymond, who's a really brilliant economist, to look at the same job creation figures, but with a longer time scale over 10 years, with more of a kind of starting point of what we need to recover nature to the point that we wanted to recover to by 2030. And he kind of teased out some of the detail in these broader sections. So he kind of focused on restoration, creation of priority habitats and boundary features, along with some of the very specific jobs that will be created and needed through a new sustainable farming scheme to make that scheme successful, including land management advice. He's also included kind of a need to improve green spaces in urban areas, woodlands, which is obviously a massive conversation at the moment, included biodiversity net gain, which has been a conversation for a while, as well as kind of the surveys and monitoring and control of invasive species, and tourism as well, which is quite a difficult issue as well. And across all of these, he's estimated that the job creation potential is almost 7,000 over the space of 10 years, which is obviously huge, and crucially, some of these jobs could be created in areas across Wales that really struggle to provide employment opportunities. So if you think about the kind of vision that Peter's laying out and kind of the pilot that Dan is envisaging, if we can kind of create a successful pilot, I think the next stage is to think about how we can successfully transfer it and scale it up. And I think these figures just outline the kind of potential that a successful pilot could achieve if it's then taken forward, which is really, really exciting. There's a bit of a caveat that I'm immediately going to follow up on, which is the skills gap that exists in Wales. That was kind of looked at by several organisations as we were kind of developing this, because as most of you will probably remember, during COVID, jobs and skills was a massive conversation as part of a green recovery. And just for context, this is a report from Transition Economics for Friends of the Earth around a UK-wide green skills gap, very specifically for the kind of farming, forestry, land management sector. And they kind of did a bit of a cross-referencing of what kind of workforce would need reskilling in order to achieve decarbonisation across these sectors, which workforces would need expanding. All of the sectors here would need expanding. Some of them would require some kind of technical upgrades around the qualification process, and some of them would require reskilling as well. And incidentally, I think the same report had quoted some reports from 2012 when this had already been raised. And apparently the green skills gap in the UK is one of the highest across all European countries, which is quite shocking and goes to show that maybe there's definitely more that can be done and should be done, especially at this point where we are with our awareness of the nature and climate crisis. Specifically in Wales, Dan mentioned this earlier, the Future Generations Commissioner commissioned the New Economics Foundation to have a look at the green skills gap that exists here, and they based it on the TUC job creation figures that we saw earlier, so that kind of over 4,000 jobs that could be created. And they kind of had a look at the current pathways of skilling into these jobs, and found a massive gap between the amount of people that we can currently train and skill and the amount of people that we could provide jobs for if we realize this potential. And it's just a bit of an obvious caveat at the moment that we could never realize the full potential of job creation if we don't have a pathway, which is why, in part, what Dan was talking about is so important, is because it creates access for people from different backgrounds, regardless of education levels, and provides an opportunity to bring them into this. I think throughout the process, we've had very interesting conversations with people coming in from kind of scouts, but also I think we had conversations with people working in prisons for a while. We've had conversations with kind of around how colleges need to be brought on board, as well as how you engage with kind of children who might still be in school, who don't have access to people who know about this. So I think there's a part here about, as well as scaling up and transferring kind of a pilot across Wales very ambitiously, is that we need a skills pipeline that will kind of contribute to a green workforce over the next 10 years. So that is very broadly the very ambitious vision of a national nature service, but is very much backed up by evidence. And we're in a stage now where we're kind of almost having a proof of concept. And this is absolutely crucial to achieving the ambitions that we had around a green recovery, but also very much so a just transition towards an economy that will help tackle the nature and climate crisis. We've had a separate report commissioned that's called a National Nature Service, What Good Looks Like, and it comes in two parts. One of them was kind of an exploration using RSPB Cymru as almost a case study of what a National Nature Service could look like for organisations and across the sector. And they identified a series of kind of next step actions and ambitions, which I've broadly categorised into three themes. One, very much around improving access, as we've kind of seen that you need more accessibility, especially at the entry-level role, accessibility for people who are reskilling, so who might have very transferable skills but no technical nature skills, as well as for young people. A kind of maybe cultural shift as well a little bit within the organizations, within the sector, within society, to kind of raise awareness for these kind of jobs. A second theme around kind of co-creation, around the role of basically everyone in this room here today on bringing young people in, bringing the right actors in beyond the nature sector, bringing communities in to help shape it, bringing young people in to help shape it, to make it work for everyone. And a third theme around kind of horizon scanning, to understand the structural changes that need to happen if this is supposed to be a long-term vision. Kind of national apprenticeship programs, skill development programs. We kind of saw during the pandemic the Kickstart opportunities, with all the kind of lessons that we learned from that, and to kind of build up schemes like that that bring young people in, to extend that to bringing in people who want to shift industries, especially under a context of a just transition, providing skills and like job analysis to understand where we need to go in the future, and then understanding the training and development needs in order to kind of bring everyone along on that journey. A second part of the report was a kind of toolkit for implementation, which took a lot of the research that they did from the case study and try to formulate clear actions on as a guide for where we could take this, you know, starting now. I'm just going to share this. The reports are all online. I'll give you the link later. I'm just going to share this because we've been using this as a bit of a guide internally because it's quite inspirational. And it's kind of taken the key themes that came out of working with the RSPB and working with young people and interviews with other partners to summarize the kind of main things that we would want to achieve. And one of them is around a diverse and vibrant working community, which is young people, but also bringing across other people that are not represented in the sector, who will have been the most affected by the pandemic, who will be the most affected by nature and climate crisis, and making sure that they're represented in a national vision for this, but also just have the access to it as well, because there's clearly barriers that exist right now. A second ambition to kind of raise the profile of jobs in nature and to understand the opportunities and how to communicate them to the right people, so that people feel like it is an option when they are considering either training or retraining. And then a third ambition of widening the audience to apply and demonstrate how the sector values learning and development. So very much focusing on the skills element. So when people come in, that they have a skills development, that there's a skills development pipeline, that they can work towards something, whether they want to stay in the sector or then break those skills to a different job. So you can read through this if it's interesting. There's like an action plan as well, which is kind of a modeled idea of how individual organizations could kind of bring in and start developing their own visions for their role in a national nature service. And hopefully it'll be scalable, so it could be organizations that are 2-3 people or large organizations. I think we've very much been developing this in the spirit that everyone can come on board and help shape it and understand what their own ambitions could be as part of this movement. We want to be inclusive about it, and we want everyone on board. And it's been one of the best things about being part of this the last few years. It's just brought in so many new ideas and so much learning. If you do want to get involved, I'm just going to share the website again. If you type in National Nature Service Wales into Google, it's the first thing that comes up. If your Welsh is better than mine, that's the website. There's a couple tabs at the top. If you go under resources, you will find all of the reports that I've talked about today, including the toolkit, the skills reports, the job reports. So you can have a browse through those. There's also some of the initial documents that we used way back in 2019, 2020. So if you're really, really interested, you can have a bit of a journey back through time and see where it all came from. Not sure if anybody's keen to revisit 2020, but the option's there if you want it. And also, if you want to stay in touch, we do have a kind of get involved page. You can sign up and keep updates if you want to get involved. This is probably the best starting point. And obviously, if you have any questions, we're all available to answer them.
That's great. Thanks very much, Tabia. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we've now got a bit of time for a bit of a Q&A session. There's been quite a lot of comments and questions in the chat, so thank you for those. I'll try and pick some of these up now and sort of play back to the panel for comment. One theme that seems to have come through, I think, in all your talks is that the sort of NNS is sort of focusing, if you like, in terms of engagement, in terms of the younger population, 60 to 25-year-olds, and kind of what about the older people? And I know that Dan and Peter, you've addressed that in the comments, but just wondering if you'd like to expand on that in terms of perhaps some of the opportunities for retraining, etc., for the not so younger age bracket, as it were. Peter, do you want to come in first to address that?
Yeah. Just to sort of certainly reinforce the point that the aim is, we've always set out this is an inclusive program. This is not sort of targeted in one age range. However, the context for it was, as has been mentioned, COVID, green recovery, issues about access to jobs, the importance of preparing a workforce for the longer term. So I think it's going to be important that we sort of incorporate into the investment that's going into young people in terms of employment and training, that the National Nature Service is fully embedded there. And so that's fully, that's a really key target for us, is to embed that in the experience on employment and training 16 to 25-year-olds. So that is a key priority, but it's not the story. The story is this is an inclusive opportunity.
Thanks, Peter. Dan, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just to give an example, I guess, from when I was in Bryngarw, so the volunteer program there. As I mentioned, it sort of conveys a whole range of skills across a range of different habitat types. Initially, I worked in Bryngarw for 15 years, and when I first started, the volunteer program there was very much a sort of middle-aged sort of age range, and some retired people as well. But as the program expanded, and as it became more sort of as it became broader and conveyed a whole range of other things, there was a lot of there's at least 2 or 3 individuals I can think of who were slightly older, I guess, who used the experience and the skills that they learned there, and the inspiration. I think that's the key thing as well, is getting the hands-on experience actually really motivates and inspires people to want to go and do more and learn more and join other courses and everything else. But there was at least 2 or 3 individuals that went on to gain paid jobs in the nature sector, if you like, who had nothing to do with that previously. One of them I can think of was working in a hotel, and then she went on to work as a volunteer coordinator, leading exactly the same sort of volunteer programs and doing great work in terms of restoring and maintaining nature on the sites that she was based on. So it's absolutely for all ages and backgrounds. Anybody can retrain at any time, and even if you're retired, fundamentally what this is a response to the nature crisis, and we need everybody to all of us, including myself and everyone else, we need to know more, we need to understand more, we need to be more engaged, and something like the National Nature Service and some of the things we put forward today become platforms for doing that. So it is absolutely for people of all ages and all backgrounds, and there are all sorts of employment opportunities no matter what the age is. So yeah.
Great, thanks both. One other comment is on the acronym NNS and potential confusion with non-native species. I don't know if if anybody would like to comment on that. It's always difficult when sort of choosing names, isn't it, and looking at the acronyms and potential clashes, etc.
Put out a W on the end, then it's a bit New South Walesy. So I don't know
any comment on that? It's just one of those things we have to live with, as it were.
Yeah, I think there's work to be done in terms of how how this fits, how it sits, and what the response is. I think that's part of the learning process of this demonstration project as well. So at this point, there's I don't think there's any fixed points at this point, to be honest. I still think we're shaping this. So in that sense, we need to look at the branding, we need to look at the messaging, we need to look at what works through this phase.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, on the learning side, there's one question here in terms of how the experience is gained on the gateway sites and how that can grow locally based opportunities elsewhere. What are the kind of opportunities and that way of facilitating that? That's probably one for you, Dan, I think, in terms of the
so I did answer
Park
in the chat that so again, using the Bryngar example, and they're oversubscribed in many ways with their volunteer program. There, it's not all about volunteering, but I'm just using that as an example because that's the way that the skills are sort of conveyed in my sort of example there. But there's a clear demand and there's a clear appetite for more of these sorts of opportunities, and at the moment they aren't being adequately met. They're not adequately serviced. So there's no shortage of demand. There's also no shortage of sites potentially on the doorsteps of communities. As I mentioned in my presentation, the Discovery Gateways are just the sort of high profile examples, but even in Bridgend, there's Bedford Park, there's all sorts of other little nature reserves and sites around that could be used as platforms for conveying these opportunities. What we lack is the sort of qualified and experienced staff resource, if you like, to develop and run those programs. So there's a number of things we could do as part of that. There's opportunities for nature-based social enterprises. So in Bridgend, there's a social enterprise called Nature Quest, and they do work with local schools and volunteers across a range of sites. The whole Guardians programme is based on Groundwork Wales, operating across a range of sites and sort of working up opportunities and taster sessions. But what we then need is for that to have a legacy and to carry on beyond those efforts. So you can imagine a sort of train the trainer type thing where you empower local communities to take on these programs themselves. The danger is, and I'm sure Tabir would sort of agree with this, if we promote volunteering too much as the way to get ourselves out of the nature crisis, we disincentivize any effort to make it green jobs out of it, and also we devalue the whole effort because it's not something that should be done by people for free because it's not that important. It's fundamental, and I'd be loath to sort of promote volunteering as the way out of it. But in terms of volunteering, creating a base, a skill base, if you like, just at a sort of a fairly low level but quite broad that anyone can tap into, anyone can gain experience of managing or looking after or getting involved with a range of different habitat types, and all the learning experience that goes with that, and crucially how that then motivates and inspires people to go on and learn more, understand more, and get involved more broadly. I think that sort of a grassroots type foundation can play a really, really solid role. So we need to maximise the use of all of these little sites that we've got, the local nature reserves and the green spaces on our doorsteps. And if we had people who were then helping to deliver and develop these programs, and local people became more actively engaged in them, we start building this movement actually of people so it becomes a genuine response to the nature crisis and not just a thing for hobbyists who are interested in badgers and want to go and do a bit of management in the local woodland for their own purposes. So yeah, we need to build a movement. We need to maximise every space. We need to get everybody involved. I've seen somebody put in the chat about older people who are sort of going into retirement, who've got this huge amount of experience that they can offer. People like that can be potentially engaged. But generally, that's what this nature service is about. It's about sort of galvanising all of that and shining the spotlight on it, joining it all up, and essentially creating a movement.
Great, thanks, Dan. Just one question as well. This is probably one for Tabir. I mean, when you were looking at the sort of job creation opportunities, has there been any analysis done in terms of potential for job creation in the marine environment? I suppose that raises a wider question in terms of the Nature Network service, covering the marine environment as well.
I can't believe someone's awake enough to spot that. No, it doesn't include marine, not because we want it to exclude it, but I believe from what Matt, who's our economist who did all the work, was saying, there's not enough data available around marine environment, which is a general issue for a lot of marine work that we do in Wales, obviously. So that's a bit frustrating to see. And I think there's also a conceptual issue that even if we had the data to then identify what would be marine jobs in a marine ecosystem and what would be jobs around coastal communities, So that's a bit of a crux in that, and we just didn't have the data to develop it, otherwise it would be in there. The only thing that we've kind of used as a starting point is a lot of the tourism jobs, which had a very, very large percentage of the job creation potential. There's a lot of them would be around coastal communities in Wales, just because of how Wales tourism kind of specializes. So I think that might be a starting point. I think in a way the starting point is more around coastal communities, because then you can look at the supply chains and local economies of an area. But the actual marine ecosystem jobs, yeah, if anybody has any data that we don't know about, please send it through. But I think that's where we are at the moment. And thank you for the question. I'm quite impressed.
Thanks, Toby. There's quite a lot around, obviously, the skills gap element, lots of comments there as well. There's one specific question in terms of opportunities, in terms of sort of engaging with agricultural colleges and building relationships there, really. So, is there scope there in terms of, creating wildlife modules, etc., for colleges? Yeah, colleagues. Who would like to pick that one up?
No, I can pick it up. Yeah, I think that's I think the links back into the education system in general is really important, and then obviously specifically with agricultural colleges, I think the relationship with FE colleges is going to be important in this too. But yes, certainly the relationship with agricultural colleges. I think what's been interesting, as colleagues referred to, we've engaged a whole range of people that we probably wouldn't have engaged with normally through this exercise. So we've had much more conversation with Careers Wales, for instance, about their role in this process as well. So yeah, I think those ideas we need to pick up and run with, and if we can focus in within the Valleys Regional Park at this stage, that will help in terms of the demonstration project. But to answer an earlier question in the chat, we are looking for proposals, ideas, which will be Wales wide in their nature in terms of how we develop beyond the demonstrator project.
And there's lots of good stuff already going on out there. I know the Rhondda Cynhadledd Living Landscapes project had biodiversity apprenticeships built into that, and those apprenticeships were linked to Countryside Management Association accreditation modules. So it's about learning what's going on already, and so an organisation like Valleys Regional Park, which has this regional sort of reach, is well placed to sort of pinpoint where areas of best practice are happening, and then to share that across the footprint and feed that back into the overall National Nature Service plan and proposal. So yeah, we're ready and eager to learn what's already happening and share that as widely as we can.
Great, thanks both. Well, it's a specific question for Tabia here. It says nature-based tourism clearly offers many opportunities and is a major industry in Ceredigion where this person works. Could you expand a little on how proposals might bring benefits both to NNS at this stage and to Ceredigion local nature partnerships? I know Peter sort of commented that LNPs are important in terms of development and working with NNS. Just wondered, Tabia, have you got some views on that?
Yeah, I think I'm not entirely comfortable answering a question very specifically about Ceredigion, because I don't know anything about it that would contribute a lot of value here. And tourism, I think, I will say this, very, very sensitive, especially when it comes to local communities. So much economies depend on it, local economies, but also if done wrong, it can really harm nature. It can cause a lot of local tensions. And I think it's in part of the consideration because the job creation potential for it is so high, and it's worth considering. It can create jobs in areas that might struggle to create jobs otherwise. But I think tourism is very, very specifically could fall anywhere along the range of dark to light green jobs. And it depends entirely on how they're done. You can have nature-based tourism that is done very much in line with nature, or either contributes to nature or at the very, very least doesn't damage it. And that's quite difficult to achieve because you need a lot of people in the room who really care about nature. If you do it very wrong, it can very significantly harm nature. So I think that's the kind of headline for tourism. And to be honest, it's not something that's been a massive part of the conversations. I think partly because it requires so much local knowledge as well. So I think that's maybe something for a little bit further on in the conversation when we're looking at potentially scaling a pilot or having another pilot, whatever happens on the back of work with Valleys Regional Park, to kind of understand that better in terms of actually contributing to the economy while not ruining nature. I hope that's enough of an answer. It's just, I know it's a very, very sensitive issue, and it causes a lot of concern. So it's quite a difficult one to talk about, especially across the economy and the nature side, to find that balance.
Thanks, Debbie. There's one question here as well, I think, wanting views from the panel in terms that you've all alluded in your presentations to the impact of nature and climate emergencies on minority communities. But wondering if you could sort of elaborate in terms of about any work carried out in Wales with minority communities. You know, do you have any examples of any planned work in and around that?
Yeah, I've just put in the chat. Yeah, this needs obviously to be a key theme for the National Nature Service, and I've just put in there an example of work that we're aware of that we need to connect to and learn from. Equally, the one I mentioned that Groundwork are involved with through a partnership, I put a link in earlier. New to Nature is another programme that is an England and Wales programme that isn't operating in Wales at the moment. We've got a session with them tomorrow, I think, to have that conversation about the links. So yeah, and I can see Sean's put another good link in there in terms of the local places for nature work.
Great, thanks, Peter. So something a little bit more general, if you like, and probably getting views from the panel. So taking the opportunity to ask my own question. So, in terms of achieving the NNS ambition, I mean, what would you all see as the main barriers, if you like, that need to be sort of broken down or addressed, or the challenges that you see in terms of getting to where you want to be in terms of the rollout of the NNS? I don't know. Start with you, Peter.
I think the obvious one is this is a cross-sector and cross-departmental issue. So that's always tough in terms of getting a government cross-sector working, cross-departmental working. It's never easy in any organisation, and it's certainly the case across governments. It's also one that we need to build from the bottom up as well. But it is going to need that cross-sector, and that means bringing private sector engagement into this as well, and cross-departmental working across ministers' departments. So yeah. It could be a good silo busting exercise in terms of a programme that will deliver the aims of the Future Generations Act in a very practical way.
Thanks, Peter. Dan, any views on barriers?
Well, generally the economy has taken a bit of another downward turn recently, and that can obviously be an issue. This does need funding, and the funding has to come from somewhere, and there seems to be less opportunity recently for that than there was even a few weeks ago. But more broadly, I think I don't know about a challenge, but I think the opportunity is around the communication of it as well. And so we've got an engagement plan as part of this chunk of funding from Welsh Government. We're going to develop the engagement plan. I think that will be key, because we can do all this great work, and we're all, especially in this conference, we're all aware of the issues, and we need to act. But that needs to filter out far more widely, and I think people generally are aware, but sometimes paralysed by a sense of being overwhelmed by everything. So we need to position the National Nature Service as a national response to this, and we need to get our communications on it right. We need to get the branding right. I'm not somebody who's big on branding and logos and everything else, but I do recognise that without that, you don't really have the platform to shout out and to shout from. So yeah, I think as well as all this amazing work and the detail of the work that's going on behind the scenes, we really need to make sure that engagement plan is up to standard, so that we can really reach out to everyone we need to engage with, and that in itself then will hopefully garner buy-in from potential funders and Welsh Government and anyone else who might be involved, and help it to be a movement, help it to have that momentum that we needed to have. So for me, that's just as key And I know for the rest of the team, it's just as key as the more detailed work that we're doing in terms of nature restoration and the links to employment.
Thanks, Dan. Tabia, any thoughts on barriers, challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both Dan and Peter. Those are really key. I think in general, this might not be a barrier, but it's definitely something that we could easily skip over and lose out on around accessibility. I think partly there's a skills element that as a sector, we tend to focus on graduates because they need an ecological skill. And there seems to be a shift where we don't even want to train someone. We need them to have an undergrad degree, and that obviously causes massive accessibility issues from the get-go. I think there's accessibility around different communities as well as a sector. I mean, a couple of years ago, there's a report that said the conservation sector is the second whitest in Wales after farming, and there's barriers there as well that are very, very difficult to understand and to break down. And I think a National Nature Service, kind of the idea of what good looks like, will at least start to understand and not perpetuate those barriers. And that's really, really difficult to do. And it's something that we have been talking about since the beginning. And I think the fact that we haven't gotten that far, or as far as I think any of us would want to, shows how difficult it is to even understand it, never mind know where to start. So I think that's the kind of, it won't stop an NNS from happening, but it'll stop it from being really good and benefiting everyone across Wales. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Tabia. We've got about just over 5 minutes left of this session. I was just wondering again to go around the panel really to get your reflections in terms of the comments that you've seen in the chat there. You know, anything I've missed. You know, sort of closing remarks, if you like, in terms of you know, how you want to sort of give your key messages at the end there. You know, from what you've heard, as I say, in the chat and the questions, and any reflections that you may have. So I'll start with you this time, Tabia.
Oh gosh, that's given me about 2 seconds. I think for people who are hearing about this the first time, it's a huge amount of work. It's been going on for a long time in a very, very weird context. I've never met Peter in person because we've done this entirely online through lockdowns and pandemics. And it's a lot of ambition packed into a very small format at the moment. And I think the one thing I'd want to have people take away from is nothing set in stone. One of the best things about this is that it's had 150 stakeholders at one point, completely destroying barriers across sectors, talking to people that I don't think in any other area of my work I've ever talked to. Really, really brilliant. And if anybody wants to get involved, very, very much up for grabs, no matter the background or your ambitions or how you think you can contribute. There will be like you'll be welcome to come and carve your own space in the process. So don't be intimidated by that. And it's been one of the best things, and we'd kind of like to bring more people in. If you think there's something that you can contribute, even if it's small, that'd be really, really brilliant. Don't be intimidated by the fact that it now has a website and a mission. It's all up for grabs, and the more voices that are a part of this, the more ideas that are a part of this, the better this idea will become.
Yeah. Thanks, Tabia. Dan, do you want to come in with your reflections?
Yeah, well, since I've started working with the Valleys Regional Park, when I came on board in 2019, one of the things we tried to set out to do initially was to map all the different things that were going on in this sort of vein across the South Wales valleys, and really quickly realised that it was almost impossible to get a handle on everything that's going on. There are so many things happening just in the footprint of the Valleys Regional Park, let alone across Wales. But you wouldn't necessarily know it if you speak to the average sort of person in the street. You know, people aren't necessarily aware of all of these things, so they don't have the profile that they need to have. And even more sort of alarmingly, people aren't necessarily aware that we're in a nature emergency. So my hope for aside from everything else and the sort of, you know, the economic potential of creating these jobs and all that, my hope for the National Nature Service is that it really shines a spotlight on the great work that's already happening and can add value to that and sort of join that up in a way that creates this sense of a movement and a sort of a genuine grassroots response to what is an existential crisis. You know, that phrase, if not us who and if not now when, that has never been more sort of applicable. We are up against it. And amazing things are happening, but we need to make sure that's recognised and that's pulled together, and it has this sense of a movement that anyone and everyone can get behind and buy into. And I really hope that the National Nature Service helps to do that. Great,
thanks, Dan. And last but not least, Peter, you opened the session, so I'll give you the last word in terms of the session.
Yeah, and I think I'll repeat probably what I said at the opening. Really, you know, I do see this as being transformative. I do see it as being a national statement in terms of our response. I see it as being a practical application of the legal frameworks that we're proud of in Wales in terms of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the Environment Act. I think it is about a movement for all. You know, and in that sense, you know, that's sort of echoes the points of Tabe and Dan and anybody who's worked on this. So we've got to keep that ambition really high in terms of this is a national statement, a national transformative model that is a response to a national crisis, and that will change. You know, that will be benefit nature and change lives for the better. So. While keeping that vision, we've then got to focus down on the practical, and the practical is to demonstrate within the Valleys Regional Park what is possible. And so that's really where we've got to focus on in this next few months. Let's demonstrate what's possible.
Brilliant, thank you, Peter. And well, I think we're nearly at the end of the session, so it just leaves me to say, you know, thank Peter, Dan, and Tibia ever so much, you know, for the presentations and contributions this morning. And, you know, thanks to the attendees for all the questions and comments in the margins there. I think, you know, you've given an open invitation there for everybody to get engaged in terms of helping the development of the National Nature Service. So no doubt you'll get bombarded by contacts outside the conference. So hope that's okay for the three of you as well. And just to say that, you know, if anybody's missed the presentations today or anything, I think there was a question at the start of the session. You know, it'll all be available online if people want to sort of revisit it or pass on to colleagues that couldn't make it today as well. So the presentations will all be available for everybody. So thank you all, and that brings this session to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we are now nearly at the point of the next element of this morning's session, which will be focusing on NRW's approach in terms of river restoration. Obviously very topical currently in terms of the condition of our rivers, and obviously, you know, the work that needs to be done to bring them back into good condition, and all the work that's ongoing as far as that's concerned. So for those that are just joining the conference, welcome to day 2 of the Wales Biodiversity Partnership Conference. So we're midway through our morning session, which the theme this morning, well, for the day is looking at ecosystems, species, and genetic sort of diversity. And so we've just had a session on the National Nature Service, and if you've missed that session, as I say, it'll all be available on the conference platform, the WOVA, I can never say that properly, platform. It will be available in due course, so you can revisit anything that you may have missed. So next presentations, as I say, will be led by NRW. First presenter will be Ian Stephen Davis, who I shall hand over now, who will introduce the work that NRW are doing in terms of river restoration.
Oh,
are you there, Ian?
Can you hear me at all? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Brilliant.
The camera's
Okay.
black though.
Yeah, that's interesting. It should be working, but I was going to turn the camera off for the presentation anyway.
So just share and then.
Have you? Yeah. Right. Can you let me know when that is showing?
Nothing at the moment. There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, well, a quick introduction then. As I said, Ian Davis, my name, River Restoration Advisor for NRW, and I sit within our freshwater ecosystems and fisheries management team, which is part of the national team under the EPP Directorate within NRW. I'm just going to talk about the National River Restoration Programme that NRW has been setting up over the past couple of years, just to help address some of the massive pressures that are being seen in our freshwater environment at the moment. So I'm just going to outline some of the needs and drivers that are around the setting up of the programme, and I'll look at some of the evidence sources and the responses that are proposed within the programme, and some of the ways that we're informing and directing these the work strands within the wider organisation, and some of the links that we're making throughout our organisation and with external groups. Also going to have a quick look at some of the challenges, successes, a couple of case studies with a colleague, Tristan, who will introduce himself a little bit further down the line, and how these are being reviewed under the programme, and how we've set up the River Restoration Programme to help communicate, collaborate further internally and externally to provide a more joined up approach to river restoration across Wales. So in terms of a definition of river restoration itself, we've adopted internally the definition that was set out back in November 2014 under a workshop convened by the IUCN and the UK National Committee, which involved around 50 experts from the UK, Ireland and further afield as well, to share their experience and identify some of the definitions and directions for river restoration within the UK. And that definition is, I am sort of paraphrasing a little bit here, but river restoration aims to reinstate naturally functioning rivers through re-establishment of natural physical processes. And that's really important, that phrase there, the natural physical processes, because this is what gives us the multiple benefits associated with these. And importantly, this includes different scales, so small scale subtle elements such as hydrogeomorphology, which is the variation of flow and sediment movement within the river on very localized river reaches, and the scale upon the catchment and multi-catchment scales, as well as the wider physical habitats of the river system. So we're looking at areas outside the wetted area, outside the wetted channel, which perhaps most people think of as the river itself, but of course we know it includes the floodplain, groundwater outside the bank areas. The multiple benefits that come from river restoration and healthy, resilient river systems are up there on the slide. But ecosystem resilience itself is pretty complex to measure and describe, but there are characteristics that exist. We can work with those to promote resilience, or that emergent property of resilience as a result of those various characteristics being in place. And I think there's a talk later on this week around the DECA approach. So I'll only mention that very briefly, the diversity, the extent, condition, connectivity and adaptability. And under each of these broad attributes, many, unfortunately, of our freshwater ecosystems score fairly low. In terms of the wider strategic drivers for the development of the restoration programme, we've got the high level elements that are coming out from Welsh Government. For example, Section 6 of the Environment Act, where we've got the statutory duty to maintain and enhance biodiversity, promote that resilience, which I've just spoken about. And of course, the declaration of nature and climate emergencies back in 2018 were really the main drivers to set up the programme. So that began back in 2020, that we decided that this was the way forward to set up a national programme. So we started interrogating some of the evidence sources to develop and drive the various projects and the way that the programme would be brought together within NRW. And back in 2019, there was some prior work done to this where a lot of the water bodies around Wales were prioritised for interventions around physical modifications. And at the time, that was the main reason that they were not achieving good status under Cycle 2 at the time of the Water Framework Directive. And that actually still remains today as the main reason under the newly published Cycle 3 classifications. So that prioritisation process gave us the catchment river restoration plans, which then were taken through feasibility, and from there to outline design for some delivery work, and then detailed design, some of which is going towards delivery now, which will form part of the case studies, part of this discussion, this talk a little bit later on. Other evidence sources included in the prioritisation process were wider really than just that strict freshwater element. So we were looking at the flood risks of the communities at risk register, some of the socio-economic work, and the looking at the multiple deprivation index, so the deprived areas of Wales, designated sites, work that was alongside external partners such as the Welsh Archaeological Trust with their river project mapping, our wider fisheries data, some RHS data, and of course the WFD status of the various water bodies did form an important part of the evidence that we were looking at. So some of those are showing up on the screen there. The maps down in the left-hand corner there, just down in here, if you can see that cursor. So that's from the salmon stock report showing the salmon recruitment performance on the principal salmon rivers in Wales. So that looks at 23 of those rivers. So that was the predicted scores for 2023. It's got the cross-border rivers there as well, the Severn, the Y and the D. And so it's based on the conservation limits, which are the estimates of the salmon producing capacity of those individual catchments. So as we look at that map, basically anything orange and red is not in a good state, that's classified at risk or probably at risk. The river stocks are basically statistically failing their management potential. So in terms of those DECA measures that I mentioned earlier, diversity as an indicator of resilience, and then this evidence shows that really within those river systems for that species, a real strong indicator species, resilience is not present there. So in terms of the restoration programme itself, the broad objectives are really to deliver more river restoration projects throughout Wales. And to achieve this, the objective is to embed river restoration programme across NRW initially as a place for advice and best practice, where we can develop case studies to help inform and encourage best practice and training and support our colleagues in the wider organisation. Really to support cross-directorate working within NRW and help align the national priorities, so those Welsh Government and our business organisation priorities, as well as some of those priorities that are coming from the bottom up. So it's really a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So the programme sits in between those two areas, Welsh Government, the leadership teams and the place teams around the country that are working on the area statement processes, the opportunity catchments and various other local priority drivers that are coming from the knowledge around place. So additionally to that, it's really to raise the profile of river restoration as a technique, as a wide-reaching technique that we can focus on all of our freshwater environments across the country. So this is both internal and external, and we've started this summer with a series of seminars, one in North Wales, one in South Wales, which were run earlier on in the year. So a little bit more detail on the role of the restoration programme and its support for the area teams, for the place teams, because we see those teams as the ones that will really be going ahead and delivering a lot of this work on the ground. You know, they're within those areas, they have that specialised knowledge of those places, those water bodies, and some of the landowners and various stakeholders, which is incredibly useful when we're looking at some of the more complex delivery that might come out of river restoration proper. And there are really advantages for those area teams working on projects to link with our core programme, as we can shoulder some of the initial work in developing the projects through the early stages. The projects are going to be multi-year, and it takes a bit of time to get those projects off the ground before they might be able to tap into some of the Welsh Government funding streams to take them forward through those subsequent years of development, planning and delivery. So we've been using the Nature and Climate Emergency Mitigation money that we get from Welsh Government to take those forward. But without that option, really, without the option of the core team of the restoration programme to help some of those complex project development actions that need to be done early on in the project can be perceived as a bit of a hurdle, so as it can take away team resource from the core tasks that they have to undertake within those place teams. Aligning with the programme also reduces the paperwork burden. The way the NRW works as a business, we have a series of paperwork challenges, shall we say, in order to be able to receive some of that grant and aid money. And within the programme itself, we can take on some of that responsibility and help those place teams complete some of that. So we're really looking at doing that, reporting it to Welsh Government at a national level, making sure that there is communication between place, national teams and Welsh Government, between our finance teams and the project management. And so we're looking for bottlenecks, looking to unblock those bottlenecks, act as facilitators and good communicators. So we do provide that high-level steer as a centrally led programme. It gives us the opportunity to ensure that river restoration outcomes are working towards addressing the problems that were originally identified through those early stage plans, and provide the link and communication, as I mentioned, with Welsh Government. And that keeps Welsh Government happy in the knowledge that what they're funding is being delivered, i.e. that it's aligning with their strategies. And as that centrally led programme, we can integrate projects from an early stage, reducing any sort of duplication and reducing costs as well. The programme provides an overarching strategy, including things like future planning, enabling early project development work to occur. There are a whole series of work strands which are coming out of the programme, and we'll cover some of those in the case studies. First of which is coming up now, and if I can hand over to my colleague Tristan. There you go, just allow your control there.
Hello
Tristan.
there. Yes. Okay. Great. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Great. That's great. Thanks. So yeah, the more observant among you will notice I'm not Katie Finken Roberts. She was originally going to give this part of the talk, but unfortunately some of the habitat restoration work that she's supervising at the moment has been delayed. So I am going to fill in for her. So this is a little case study about some river restoration work that we're doing to benefit freshwater pearl mussel. Now, freshwater pearl mussel, for those of you who don't know about these are an amazing species. They're a really long-lived species, and they are something that we used to have probably millions of in rivers in Wales, because they are a species that tends to occur in very large agglomerations across riverbeds, and they fundamentally transform the habitat. So this isn't just about a rare species that's endangered, it's also about the health and the resilience of the entire river environment. So let's go on a slide. Can I do that? Yeah, thank you. So can we click the video? This is actually a little video. I hope this will show up okay for people. So we just thought that we'd make it a little bit more interesting by having a video of some pearl mussels in habitat underwater. I don't know if is that playing at all, Ian?
Oh,
There we go. That's it. So these are some pearl mussels actually in the river. You can see they like to live, these are adult mussels, they get to about 10 centimeters or so long, and they like to live half buried in gravels. The juveniles live for a short time parasitically on salmon or trout, and then they will drop off and live buried in those gravels. So the next slide. How do I go to the next slide? Can someone move it forward for me? Thank you. So freshwater pearl mussels are critically endangered in Wales. They have declined. We think we probably have less than 1,000 left now. And the main reason for that is lack of juvenile survival because of damage to the structure of the river habitat, as well as to water quality issues. So we now have in NLW a pearl mussel strategy which uses a twin track approach of habitat restoration, which is the key part of it, because we want to get them living again in the wild and having self-sustaining populations, but also because the populations are so small and because there are so few left. We also have our captive rearing and release program developed under IUCN guidelines, which is rearing juvenile mussels for release. And this is in case the habitat restoration doesn't take root in time for the juvenile mussels, for the mussels to survive. And this is funded under the Welsh Government Nature and Climate Emergencies Capital Programme. On the next slide, please. So there is some work, there's a variety of works we're doing. Some of this is quite vanilla. Fencing and wall repair obviously is very important to restrict stock access or to manage stock access to rivers. And obviously if you have a herd of cows or something like that trampling around, or a bunch of sheep that have just been dipped, you don't want that in the rivers where we've got sensitive species. So we've been doing this kind of basic work, working with farmers and land managers to sort those kind of issues out. And we're also restoring wetland habitat adjacent to rivers because that helps to trap nutrients that are coming in, and it also helps to regulate river flow during drought events, which we're seeing increasingly, unfortunately, in Wales. Many of our rivers in East Wales are still under drought warning. And finally, the other thing that we're doing in catchments is blocking drainage ditches that were cut into peat. Peat can actually include quite a lot of fine material which clogs gravel beds and also introduces nutrients into the river. Go to the next slide, please. Now, one of the biggest problems with pearl mussels is simplification of our rivers. It's, I think, something that's not really realised is how much we've altered rivers in the past, and this is quite a good example of it. So this is a project that we're doing in North Wales, and you can see here we've got a big digger, and he's not taking boulders out of the river, he's putting them back in again. The boulders that he's perched on there were actually dredged out of this river about 50 years ago, about when I was born, and the consequence of that is that those boulders, essentially the riverbed now has washed away, because those boulders were trapping gravels and sands, which were important for pearl mussels to live in and bury in, but also they were important for things like salmonid fish to hide behind, and of course salmonids spawn in gravels and sands as well, and that would also have been incredibly important for a great range of river invertebrates. So this project is essentially putting the bed back in the river. So can I have the next slide, please? So we're introducing large materials. You can see this quite clearly in this picture. Beforehand, you've got a rather boring section of river, which has very little in the way of flow diversity and very little in the way of cover. And then afterwards, having put these boulders back in the river, you're immediately seeing a little bit more in the way of habitat complexity. It's not really totally clear yet because the flow's a bit high, so we're not really seeing the boulders giving their full benefits. But if you can see the next slide here, this is a little bit more dramatic. So the other thing we've been doing, once you've got the boulders in, which provide the skeleton effectively within the river habitat, you can then start to reintroduce those gravels as well. This particular river where the boulders were taken out doesn't have a natural supply of gravel, or at least it has very small natural supplies of gravels. So it will take hundreds of years for the gravels to replenish themselves on their own. So we're having to reintroduce gravel as well. And we've reintroduced about 100 tons or so of, sorry, I beg your pardon, 330 tons of gravels and sands to the river, which has been carefully chosen for its physical and chemical similarity to the existing material. So can you just click on that slide, and hopefully that will show it a little bit more clearly. Oh, there we go. So so you can see here we've got all this material here, which has been spread among the boulders and is being trapped by them. What we'll expect to see over time is that this will sort of bed down a little bit, and it'll be reworked a little bit by flood flows in the river, so that you'll see it becoming a little bit more natural looking, with little channels developing and then sort of gravel banks in behind the boulders. So yeah, we go. So this is the final slide. And this is a drone image showing the restored area, and you can see quite dramatically how we've put back the riverbed in this area. This will over time colour up a little bit, so it'll blend in a little bit more with the existing riverbed. And once that habitat is completely, we're happy that that habitat has stabilised, we will start reintroducing the captive mussels to this section. So I hope that gives you an idea of some of the things you can do with river restoration, and it's trying to restore the habitat complexity, which will be good not just for mussels but for all kinds of species. And hopefully the restoration of a breeding population of mussels in this area will also benefit all kinds of other species by cleaning the water and by stabilising the habitat still further. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Jan now.
Thanks, Tristan. I think I've, yeah, there we go. Got my cursor back. So yeah, on to the next case study. So it's part of the physical modifications program that I mentioned earlier, down in the Ely catchment in south central Wales. It's quite a small subcatchment of the Ely. There were quite a diverse set of drivers for working in this location. One of the predominant reasons really was it's a landowner who was open to working with us, quite a landowner with quite a significant amount of land. So we decided to work down here alongside him and use this project really as a bit of a springboard to wider catchment works, future works later on down the line. So the catchment area is about 15 square kilometres, something like that. The Dowlice is quite a rural catchment, a small handful of villages, but there are several new housing developments being built here, and obviously that's going to have future implications. So the very nature of the catchment is changing. There's going to be a lot more hard standing areas and things like that, areas that will be shedding water. And the obvious implications on the river systems there. The cycle 2 status for this water body was moderate. The cycle 3 2021 status has been downgraded, unfortunately, to poor. Fish species. The eel, salmon, trout down here are one of the main reasons for it not achieving a good status, and the hydromorphology was also not high. So the current channel is shown on this map as the blue line, and you can see in the very straight. It's been canalized in the late 19th century, but from this map you can see where the original channel would have been. The length of the current channel is about 800 meters, so that's the length of the project channel that we'll be working on. So to give an indication of some of the benefits of this sort of work in terms of remeandering, we'll be looking at reduced flow rates and scouring, that is erosion downwards into the channel itself. We'll be looking at a better connection with the floodplain via a 2-stage channel, and there'll be more land available to flood with subsequent deposition of sediment on there. This removes that sediment from the water column. And there's quite a wide evidence base now being gathered about the various benefits of this sort of river restoration project. And for example, a channel with an average 20% increase in channel length combined with an increase in frequency of large woody debris and boulder accumulations has resulted in a measurable reduction in flow peak magnitude. So that's one of the elements of benefit that we'll be looking at. The new channel will occupy some of the current channel area, and this will help us with issues like in keeping cover and shading over the channel, over the river itself, while the new channel area will be planted up. This borders on a triple SI, which is designated due to the presence of a plant species called monk's hood, which likes quite shaded, dappled sunlight areas and things like that. So it was quite important to us to have that element preserved within this project. So while the new channel is planted up and that generates and creates shading, then some of the current channel will still remain within the current wooded area. So in discussions with the landowner, we've had to talk around the sustainable farming scheme to quite some detail, which has been difficult. There's been an element of crystal ball gazing over the last couple of years. And that's become a little bit clearer this year with the release of some of the options under the SFS. And several of those elements have really helped us to get the agreement of the landowner to allow us to go ahead with this, and to agreement with the tenant as well. And those are things like, for example, the 10% tree cover of holding needed and 10% land assembly in natural habitat. So those have been really useful discussions. Associated with this area are some of the usual pressures that we have on the freshwater, and we'll look to mitigate all of these within the project. And that has been really understood through discussions with the tenant who's managing a stock on the land. So he needs things like access to the fields beyond, obviously needs to provide drinking water for the stock and things like that. So we can get rid of these unconsented crossings. We can get rid of the sediment input, which you see on the picture on the left there as cattle are poaching up that area on the course. Another strong reason for choosing this area to work on really was when we discussed the original river restoration plans with the place teams down here, they knew that the paleo channels were still in existence, which is quite unusual for a river that was modified that long ago. Most of the time these are ploughed out of existence, and there's very little evidence on the ground as to where the river would have flowed in the past. But as you can see from this picture, the paleo channels are quite prominent. So we're looking to reconnect those. We've gone to an outline design now, and this is just an early outline design where we're looking at the various cross-section areas through that piece of corridor. It's very likely going to be a two-stage channel which can accommodate low flow conditions. We are receiving more and more drought conditions throughout summers in Wales, so we have to really accommodate that and be mindful of that when we're designing different channel elements going forward. And this is the current outline design for the placement of the channel. So as I mentioned, the existing channel is around 800 meters, and the length of channel that will exist after the project is delivered will be over 900 meters. So we'll be adding an extra 100 meters to this piece of river, and we'll get all of the associated benefits with that, the increased habitat diversity and the increased floodplain reconnection and things like that. The contractor that we're working with is called Binnies, and they're being managed internally by our project delivery team and our river restoration team. And we're getting from them a whole package of works, including hydraulic modelling to assess the flow regimes and really look at the flood risk benefits here. And just downstream of here, there is infrastructure that is threatened by flooding, and at the moment, a couple of times a year, there are roading infrastructure areas that are unusable due to floods. So we're going to gather all of that information, get some modelling to help us design the geomorphology element of the delivery part, and make sure that this complies with the principles and the planning guidance, which is TAN 15, and we'll obviously have to go through a flood risk permitting process. So we need all of that information in the background just to help us get through to that point where we can deliver. There are Section 7 species and designated sites through this area, as I mentioned, the SSSI and the Monkshood. So that has been an important element for our design work. So we've got funding up to the point where we have the detailed design going through at the moment, and we're looking hopefully to deliver this project in summer 2023. We've got landowner agreement, which is quite a major bonus for us, and yeah, pending the final budget commitments, we're looking to deliver next year. Other work streams that are coming out of the river restoration programme is development of a mapping project. This really is quite essential to help us integrate work and facilitate planning across the nation. Really, and we have colleagues have developed this mapping portal, which will be available through ArcGIS online, initially internally within NRW, just to help us connect through some of the work that is already going on under the Freshwater umbrella, but it will be going externally at some point in the future, perhaps early mid 2023. So really the aim is to integrate all the freshwater work that we are doing going forward. It'll clearly be quite useful to have a visual aid such as this to really see what is going on, what stage the projects are in, and help us to interpret that data when we're looking at planning and budgeting. So what you're seeing on the map there includes much of the fisheries work that's going on, much of the river restoration work, and the freshwater pearl mussel work that Tristan just spoke about, but it doesn't include the LIFE projects that we've got running. So that's the D-LIFE and the new Four Rivers project across South Wales. It doesn't include any of that, and it doesn't include the metal mines work either. So you can see there's already quite a lot of information on that map, and you know, that's a small fraction of what is actually going on freshwater when we're freshwater within NRW. So having this portal is going to be really essential, really, so we'll be able to switch on and off layers to get a feel for what is going on where, different stages of the project. And that's my last slide, actually. So thank you very much for listening. I think we hopefully have some time left for some questions.
Thanks very much, both. As I say, really good run through, as I say, from the strategic perspective, to giving us, you know, a couple of case studies of practical action that NRW are undertaking. I'm just conscious of time. We have run over slightly, and we hadn't factored in a Q&A session for this particular session. But I think if anybody's got any, you know, specific questions, please pop them in the chat, and I'm sure, you know, both Tristan and Ian will be happy to answer those, you know, as they come in. So just to say thank you to you both for your presentations. Apologies to the attendees. I think they might have had a bit of difficulty hearing you, Ian, in terms of you were a bit quiet at times. But I think we got everything that you said, even though it might have been a little bit quiet for some. So thank you both very much for your presentations, which leads us on now to our final session of the morning, sort of continuing the river theme. We're now sort of handing over to Hilary Foster and Rodri Powell from NRW, who are going to sort of give presentation, I think a bit of a double act in terms of protecting rivers from physical modifications. So again, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat, and we'll endeavour to deal with them from there. Okay, so over to you. Is it Hilary leading first?
Yes, good morning. If Rodri can just share the slides for me from his end, let me know when everyone, well, I should be able to see them hopefully the same time as everyone else.
They should be coming through, are they?
Right, takes a moment, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Everyone's getting hungry. Bear with us. Lots of pictures in our presentation, so hopefully get you through till lunchtime.
Not seeing anything at the moment, Roger.
Nothing yet, Rod. No.
It is loading. The bar is slowly increasing.
Okay, fine, okay.
It's probably because there's a lot of pictures in it, I suspect.
Yes. For some reason, it doesn't want to load.
Oh.
I can share it from this end if you just give me a second.
Try an alternative. There we are.
There we go.
How's that?
Yeah,
We'll have to do it
that's
manually.
fine, yeah.
There we go.
Right, so can we click through the slides, or do I need to ask you?
You'll have to ask me to move through them. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. There, that's fine. Right, we'll get going then. Hello everyone, I'm Hilary Foster from Natural Resources Wales, and yeah, I'll be doing this presentation with my colleague Rhodri, and we'll be talking about protecting rivers from physical modification. And this presentation follows on quite nicely really from Ieuan and Tristan's talk, because of course equally as important as addressing historical harm and damage to rivers is ensuring that you know, we limit such harm going forward, and we address sort of current ongoing harm. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And actually this work that we'll be talking about is actually part of our river restoration programme. So just really briefly, this is what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about why is protecting rivers from mods, as we tend to call it. You know, why is this important? Then we'll talk about the regulation of works to rivers and a quick overview of the regulatory regime. Then we'll talk about the problem, both in terms of unauthorised work, so that's illegal works to rivers, but also in terms of authorised sort of consented works. Then we'll touch on some solutions that we'd like to see for these issues, and then we'll end with some next steps of how we'd like to engage with our partners and stakeholders to take some of these solutions forward. If you can keep clicking, whoever's in charge, thank you. There we are. Right, so yeah, Ieuan and Tristan have touched on a lot of this, so I'll just whiz through. But you know, why is protecting rivers from modification important? Well, good river health comprises of three key elements. We've got water quality, water quantity, and geomorphology. There's been a lot of focus and scrutiny of water quality in recent months, but that isn't just the whole picture when it comes to good river health. There's a lot more to it. We also need good good water quantity. We need to have enough flow in the river and good diversity of flow, and also seasonal variation. But then also we need good geomorphology. So again, as Ieuan has touched on, geomorphology is about the sort of physical nature of the river channel and its banks and its immediate environment, and it's that physical structure of the channel and its banks that sort of then underpins good habitat. So mainly what we'll be talking about today in our talk is how to look after that geomorphological element of rivers. Next slide, please. So here's just what we mean when we say good habitat. You know, what do we want to see? So we've got a couple of slides here of just, oops, it's disappeared for me. I'll keep talking. What does good river habitat look like? Well, for a sort of typical Welsh river, we might want to see something like, oops, I don't know what.
Oh, it stopped sharing.
Yeah, what are you guys seeing now?
Roger, it's what you were trying to share earlier. It's
Oh, it gradually loaded.
It gradually loaded in the background, so we can see that now.
Right, I'll take control of that
go.
then. Right, sorry about this, guys. There we are. I'll keep going. Yeah, so examples of nice river habitat where we want to see, as I was saying, a diverse flow, you know, shallow areas, deeper areas, and so on. Some in-channel habitats such as boulders and fallen wood, nice shaded banks, you know, to help protect from increasing temperatures associated with climate change, of course, and no barriers. You know, we don't want to see as far as is possible, weirs and other types of barriers that impede passage of species and sediment throughout the system. And of course, connection to floodplain, that's crucial as well, so that the river can spill out onto its floodplain to relieve pressure during high flows. So these are the sort of key elements of good habitat, and of course a very upland, moorland stream or a lowland tidal section of river will look a bit different to this. But in general terms, these pictures just give you a flavour of what we're aiming for. And again, as Ian has touched upon, it's not all about biodiversity. It's also about what ecosystem services these rivers provides to us as society as well, and about ensuring that we can have our rivers in the best possible condition so that we can achieve those ecosystem services, and also resilience to pressures. A healthy river is so much better able to resist pressures, and again, crucially, climate change and increased frequency of severe flood events and so on. So what do we mean when we say modified rivers? Well, you've probably all got a pretty good idea by now, but just some lovely photos just to illustrate the point. You can see some examples here. We've got concrete walls and sort of constrained channels. We've got a dredge channel, dredging and straightening, removing all that bed material and that in-channel habitat. Barriers, a typical highway crossing may include, pipes and culverts with an apron that then becomes perched and causes a barrier to species movement, and hard engineered banks which interferes with flow dynamics and can inadvertently cause other issues such as erosion further downstream and so on. And a few more examples here. We've got, a concrete channel, which is clearly, not good for biodiversity. And sometimes you'll see the riverbed sort of encased in a wire mesh, which creates a sort of over wide, very shallow section of watercourse. It's very difficult for species to navigate. Again, straightened rivers and gravel removal, the removal of the bed material is also a problem. I'll touch on a bit more about that later on. And so a modified channel, it cannot provide these ecosystem services that we've talked about, and it can't resist the pressures so well as a healthy channel. It's absolutely crucial that we get our rivers in the healthiest condition possible to help resist these channels. And okay, this picture here in this photograph, that's an extreme example. That's the Lower Ogmore in Bridgend, obviously seriously modified. However, most of our rivers in Wales, they are modified to some degree or another. There might be small modifications that then combine to create a cumulative effect. And again, all those small modifications undermine the ability of that river to cope with pressures. On this slide, this is just to sort of make the point again that physical modification is the key issue, really, the major issue facing our rivers in Wales today. This is data from our Water Framework Directive reporting on the reasons for not achieving good status. So you can see that physical modifications is more of a problem than pollution. And then the map on the left-hand side, I don't know if you can really see the key, but basically it shows that all the areas in the orange and sort of brown colours are catchments that either are at risk or probably at risk of physical modification. So it's just to illustrate the extent of the problem. So I'll hand over to Rhodri now to talk about the regulation.
Thank you very much. So as Hilary mentioned, I want to touch upon the sort of consenting of the regulatory aspects of works to rivers. So Hilary has given us a flavour, an overview of a healthy river ecosystem and how it's not just about water quality and quantity. And she's given us some really good examples of features that cause habitat degradation. And this presentation is loaded with photographs as examples, so it's probably why it was a bit slow. So the majority of features that have been mentioned so far are the result of human activity, and that's mainly housing development or significant engineering works. So we wanted to explore how such features are regulated, how they come about. So to understand that, we first got to take a step back, and we need to understand we have two types of watercourses. So we have a main river and an ordinary watercourse. So for everything which is not defined as a main river or a named river, we term this an ordinary watercourse, and that falls under the remit of the Land Drainage Act. And the definition is really broad, and I'll read it out to you. So it's all rivers and streams and all ditches, drains, cuts, culverts, dikes, sluices, sewers, and passages through which water flows. So as you can see, that's all encompassing. And I was always taught to consider it an ordinary watercourse more like the veins and the capillaries, whereas main rivers are more like the arteries to a river ecosystem. So in terms of the legislation, works in, over, under, or adjacent to a main river or a coastal flood defence are consented by Natural Resources Wales, and that's via a flood risk activity permit, which is administered under the Environmental Permitting Regulations, England and Wales 2016. Works in an ordinary watercourse are consented by the lead local flood authority, which is the local authority for the relevant area, and that's administered via an ordinary watercourse consent under the Land Drainage Act. So in Wales, the regulation of activities is split between NRW and the LLFA. So as you can see, there's two separate regulating bodies, which inevitably causes confusion. So I think a key consideration of these regimes in terms of the considerations of consenting a design is the effect on flood risk. That's the main consideration. But it's also to deliver environmental outcomes, such as those of the Water Framework Directive and the Section 6 duty in the Environment Wales Act. So when we're designing and considering these activities, we need to be really mindful of future impacts and ensure no deterioration, specifically as Hilary talked about the geomorphological implications earlier. So Hilary's now going to go back and give us a flavour of WFD considerations in a consenting application.
Yeah, I just want to give a really quick overview of the WFD regulations and how they relate to works in rivers. Because even though we've had these regulations now for almost 20 years, I think it's fair to say that they're not actually really very well understood when it comes to the compliance assessment of works in rivers. So as you're probably all aware, all rivers have an objective to reach a minimum of good status. So we need to get them to either good status or high status. And also all rivers are legally protected then from pollution, modification and abstraction. So anything that then affects their achievement of that good status. And then also what we need to do is ensure that anything that we do to rivers does not cause deterioration. So wherever they are on that scale of high through to bad, as you can see there, we need to ensure, well, two things really, that they don't deteriorate from where they currently are, but also that we can get them to a minimum of good status. And all works on rivers should be subject to a WFD sort of screening and compliance assessment exercise. And this is where we could be a lot better at doing this. And the purpose of that compliance assessment is to just, exactly as I've explained, ensure that we don't have deterioration and get the best possible outcomes. And it's a sort of similar process, if you like, to a HRA process, which we're much more familiar with. But it's just taking that proposal through a process to ensure that we don't inadvertently cause any harm or prevent that achievement of good status. And you can see here they've tried to show where hydromorphology or geomorphology, we tend to use the two terms interchangeably, where hydromorphology fits in. So you can see here that it's part of the ecological status, which then feeds into and informs the overall status. So I just thought it was worth explaining how this element of river health fits in to our WFD objectives and our statutory objectives. So now we'll move on to talk about the problem, and I'm going to start with talking about unauthorised modifications to rivers, so illegal works basically. And I'll start with an excerpt from SONAR, our Freshwater chapter in SONAR, because we flagged this issue in that chapter. And you can see here that in the 4-year period between February 2016 and April 2020, we received 400 reports of this incident type, and those are the only ones that we know about. There's likely to be others, plenty more perhaps, that we didn't know about. So this is quite a significant problem across Wales. So just to give you a flavour of the sorts of incidents that come in, we have examples such as this, where dredging examples where the bed material has just been dug out, and in this case placed along the sides of the bank, and that's not only extremely damaging ecologically, but it's actually completely futile, because during high flows that material will get washed back in anyway, which is good from an ecological point of view. Now, gravel extraction or gravel mining, this is a really common problem in the rural areas of Wales in particular, where landowners will often take gravel out and then they'll use that gravel for example, creation of new tracks and repair of gateways and sometimes foundation to farm buildings, that sort of thing. And at times they can take, really vast quantities. It's not necessarily just a wheelbarrow full. We're talking, trailer loads. And also this can be a problem that is repeated on a yearly basis because some landowners are unaware that this is, illegal, but also highly damaging. Another example of gravel mining, this is an example from Mid Wales where you can see the area outlined in red, all that gravel, those nice in-channel features, those gravel bars were removed to create a new track, as shown in yellow there. So, a considerable length of track, as you can see. Gold panning. Now this is a problem specific to Mid and North Wales really, and we're not sort of talking about a couple of people with some hand tools. In some areas, this is taken rather seriously, and there's sort of specific mechanical tools that people use, and it can cause wholesale sort of devastation of the riverbed. All this riverbed material has been sort of churned up, and it can affect significant lengths of river as well. So that's a problem in North and Mid. Realigning, this is again something that we see often where you'll have a nice meandering section of river and that will be straightened to gain land. And there's a misconception that having a sort of nice tidy straight river is much better than having a nice meandering section. And this is a photo of the blue line in the previous slide, the realigned section, where you can see we've just got a sort of dredged canal and a completely inappropriate river profile there. So what are the impacts of these kinds of activities? Well, they're actually very long-term, very severe impacts, because these rivers are often unable to restore themselves. I mean, it can take decades for a river to restore itself from this kind of damage, if indeed it can restore itself at all. And sometimes, as here is shown, active remediation is required, and it can be extremely costly. And often, we'll never really undo the damage that was done. And there's often some unforeseen consequences from this kind of work. So, for example, there can be increased flood risk and increased erosive power, because, for example, if you're straightening a river, you're speeding up the flow and you're creating an issue further downstream, clearly reducing the biodiversity and habitat value, and again reducing the resilience of that river to pressures. So you can see in this picture below here the straightened section of river. It's just gone sort of, the mayhem it's caused where the river tries to readjust and get back to its old course. So I'll pass on to Rhodri now to talk about authorised modifications.
Thank you very much. So authorised modifications to rivers, or consented modifications. So as Hilary mentioned earlier, the SONAR State of the Natural Resources report published in 2020 is summarised this issue perfectly. And I'll read the quote to you. A key pressure to the sustainable management of these freshwater ecosystems is their continued physical degradation resulting from development and other consented activities. Despite legislative and policy tools designed to protect freshwater habitats, development continues to cause significant permanent harm to river, floodplains, and other water features. So, as the point says on the slide there, we're still seeing very significant engineering approaches and a large number of physical modifications which impact on river ecosystems. So, this is contrary to our aims, and it undermines our wider restoration objectives, which Ian touched upon earlier. So with awareness at events like this, I think we're slowly starting to see that mind shift towards more sustainable solutions being developed. And I think that approach needs to gather momentum and pick up pace. But we still see examples such as these. So the culvert inlet on the left and the bank protection on the right is significantly altered river hydraulics, and it's resulted in local changes in habitat quality. And it often results in barriers to the movement of fish and other species. So as you can see here, this flood alleviation scheme has resulted in the installation of a debris screen and a weir slightly upstream as well, which acts as that barrier to migration. So some more examples. And as I said earlier, we've tried to pick the most significant ones to give you a flavour of the true scale of the impacts that we're seeing. So when it comes to authorised modifications to rivers, the reasons for these pressures is very complex, and it's probably in part due to a lack of awareness and understanding amongst decision makers. And as we touched upon earlier, perhaps the variation of approaches between the consenting regimes, so ordinary watercourses and main rivers. There's still also the perception that environmentally sensitive and sustainable solutions are more expensive to design, build and construct. And me and Hilary were doing some brainstorming for this presentation, and we were looking back through history. And as humans, we have a strong affinity for modifying our watercourses for human gain. So more often than not, that's to the detriment to habitat, and this cultural legacy still continues today. So we need that change in mind. We need to see that shift in mindset to one that works with natural processes and better protects our freshwater ecosystems. And there's many, many more examples. You probably know your own. I know I spot lots regularly when I'm walking the dog. And I want to give you a flavour of a few more. So as we can see here, there's been some significant engineering. So a concrete apron has been cast on this tributary. So it's removed all the habitat. We've got an erosion control wall, a blockstone wall, where there's scouring, which is occurring at the toe. We've got a very shallow culvert, and we've got a box culvert, which is the sort of engineer's go-to favourite. So over to yourself, Hilary, for the solutions.
Right, so now we'll talk about how we want to address these problems, and I'll start off by talking about what we've done in NRW to address these unauthorised activities, these illegal works, and by setting up a task and finish group to address the problem. So at the end of 2020, we had a particularly bad year in 2020 with some really awful incidents, probably exacerbated by the long lockdown period. So we set up a task and finish group with the aim to ensure efficient, robust and consistent regulatory response to hydromorphological harm incidents. And our group comprised of a wide range of individuals from the relevant departments in NRW, and key to that was the support we received from our legal specialists. And the objective of this group, what we did is we really fully examined our remit in NRW in terms of what we can do to respond to these incidents, and also what legislative tools that we have. And as part of this process, we've now got a really clear process in place, and we also have guidance for our officers. And so we are now in a position to respond effectively to these incidents. And I think it's fair to say in the past that's something we didn't do too well. So just to explain what the incident response process is, these incidents, if we have a report of an incident such as this, they are immediately classified as high priority, and that means that they have an immediate response. And so the first priority clearly is to get out on site or to contact the landowner and to stop the work to prevent further harm. And then from there, it is our geomorphology technical specialists that tend to lead on the investigation to assess the level of harm and to gather the necessary evidence. And then we will again liaise with our legal team to work out what is the best enforcement option. So in terms of enforcement options, I want to talk a bit about the use of regulatory notices, because we, as part of this work, we realise that we have these tools, and they are actually a really efficient and effective way of dealing with the majority of these incidents. So notices can be issued to both prevent further work and to remediate the harm. And we can issue these notices either under the Water Resources Act, and that's for any river, so main and ordinary rivers, or we can use a very similar mechanism, a very similar notice under the environmental permitting regulations, and those are for main rivers only. So a notice to prevent further work or to remediate harm can be issued for the same site. Indeed, they can actually form part of the same document. You can see here the example on the right-hand side. The top part is to do with the stopping works, and then the second part is to do with the remediation of the harm. The remediation requirements may be really quite straightforward steps, or depending on the type of incident, it may be a more sort of complex technical plan that's required. And yet these notices, they can be served on a landowner or a contractor or both. And they are quick and efficient to use. They're a 3-page template. And so we can get these out the door pretty quickly, subject to the appropriate approvals from our legal colleagues. And the other important thing to note about these notices is that they're very unlikely to be challenged. And that's because we're not saying to anybody, you can't do anything to your river ever again. I mean, that's not the purpose. What we're saying is, please don't do anything else to your river without coming to speak to us first and making sure that you've got the appropriate permissions in place and that what you're doing will not cause inappropriate damage. So once we've issued these notices, so far we've had no non-compliance. But if we were to have a non-compliance or a breach of these notices, then we can actually go straight to prosecution at that point. Or in the case of a Water Resources Act notice, we have the option, if we want to issue a variable monetary penalty or a fine. So what's the trigger for issuing these notices? I mean, you know, we can't just go around issuing them willy-nilly. You know, we have to be very careful and have a considered approach to how, you know, when is it appropriate to use this tool? And so if we're issuing a Water Resources Act notice, the sort of threshold of harm, if you like, is tied back into the Water Framework Directive definitions of hydromorphological quality elements, which you can see there. So that's, yeah, it's specifically tied back again to the geomorphology of the river. And then for EPR notices, it's a slightly broader threshold, if you like, of evidence of environmental harm. And it's our technical specialists alongside our legal colleagues that make that decision whether these thresholds have been met and whether it's appropriate to use these notices. But it's important to note as well that for severe offences, we still have the option of going straight to a prosecution if we feel it's necessary and it's justified under a range of different types of legislation. It's quite a complex legislative picture, but we can go straight to prosecution as well if we want to, as well as using these notices. So regarding notices issued to date, this is just to show you how many we've issued, and these figures are now actually slightly out of date because I collated these back in the summer, so we've issued a few more since then. And so, yeah, the geographical spread, you know, we've been using these notices Wales-wide. No challenges to date. They're proving to be very effective. They provide that line in the sand, that clear regulatory response. And they're particularly useful in addressing repeat offenders, because we did have some individuals that, despite previous correspondence, would continue to carry out sort of these activities. So it's quite difficult. But now these notices are serving a much more sort of, you know, clear and robust regulatory response, and are serving as an effective deterrent. So I'll hand back to Rhodri now to talk about authorised activities. Are you there, Rod? I can't hear you.
Oh, apologies, I'm on mute. So in terms of consented or authorised activities, it's clear that this ongoing damage is contrary to all our objectives, and it challenges our ability to restore river ecosystems. So what solutions are available to us? I think we need to start seeing that shift in mindset away from the quickest and cheapest option towards the sustainable. We need to be working with natural processes and considering geomorphological response to activities on watercourses. Base our decisions on evidence with options appraisal, with a whole life cost and impact assessment to make that evidence-based decision, and robust mitigation where that's absolutely necessary. But in some instances, existing physical modifications, as Ian mentioned earlier, can sometimes be improved by retrofitting some solutions. So we've got an example here of some baffles which have been installed into a culvert to create that variability in flow to enable fish passage. So some more examples of sustainable solutions. Clear span bridges, they're the sort of the ultimate objective, to move away from culverts. Got bioengineering techniques. So we've got examples here of large woody material being used as bank reinforcement. We've got rock rolls and coir matting to allow establishment of vegetation at the toe of the river channel. And some more practical examples where we've got chestnut stakes being retained by retaining rock rolls and brushwood being installed in the channel to create that habitat and provide erosion control technique. And an example of an actual site, sort of before, during and post construction, where we can see the scour has occurred on the channel, which has been straightened. We've got rock roll, which has been installed as the toe to provide that stability. And we've got the post works where the channel is vegetated. It's not the most ideal of examples. We would like to see some more vegetation variability in that channel, but it gives you a flavour of what a sustainable option can look like. So in terms of next steps, it's clear that the pressures created by authorised and non-authorised works are having that significant effect on our watercourses and freshwater ecosystems. And this only serves to challenge NRW's river restoration programme objectives. And it undermines climate and biodiversity recovery objectives, which was mentioned in some earlier presentations. And we really need to understand the interaction between Water Framework Directive and Environment Act duties for public bodies which are responsible for the consenting of these activities. So what are we looking to do about it? Well, Hilary has explained the proactive work that she's been undertaking to deal with illegal or unconsented activities. But to progress the other aspects, we need to talk about, engaging with key partners and stakeholders to overcome the barriers that exist and perhaps understand the true scale of the issue. We need to work together to share knowledge, evidence, and upskill as an industry. And we need to increase awareness of the problem and potential solutions that exist. And we should be providing guidance to achieve better outcomes and the outcomes that everybody wants to see going forward to address the climate and nature emergency. So we wanted to provide you with some useful links to the River Restoration Centre and the Manual of River Restoration Techniques, which you can have a look at. Thank you very much for listening. And Hilary and I have placed our emails on the very first slide. So we're happy to take any questions that you may have via email. Thanks very much.
That's great, Hilary and Rodri. Thanks very much. As I say, we have run a little bit into the lunch break, but I think it was worth it. In terms of going through what good looks like. The regulatory process. And looking at some of the impacts of different types of modification, and then obviously importantly the solutions as well that can be used to address those. So thank you very much for running through that. As I say, you've put your contact details up, so if anybody like to come back either in the chat or via the links, that would be great. Oh, there's just a comment. Yeah, everything will be shared. It'll be available online in terms of the presentations as well. So if anybody's missed anything, please have a look in terms of the conference details that'll be put up. And as I say, all presentations over the week will be made available. So thank you very much. And that's left for me to do now. That comes to the end of this morning's session. Just like to thank all the presenters this morning and attendees for taking part. So we're now into lunch until 1:30 when the next session will start. So everybody enjoy your lunch and the rest of the conference. Thank you all.